We've had 2 weeks of the EFL Championship on Sorare at this point, and for me so far, it's been a tale of woe. And not like, whoa, that's some great scores there, ROYALIVI. More like, whoa, that's fucking dog shit, ROYALIVI. Game week 1 of Championship action, for example, and the Bristol City stack went down in flames after a first half red card. You can never really expect too much from your team at that point onwards once you receive a red. And then in leaderboard team 2, we were ravaged by a 90% DNP of Ben Davies. Now, true Bolton fans probably could have told me that was a generous figure, but I digress. We went with the numbers, and unfortunately, with no sub coming in, it meant we likely missed out on an extra £32 of the King's finest if my other choice in McGuinness had gone into the team, which he would have done. Of course, that's easy to say after the fact, and it will always make sense to pair up a goalkeeper and a defender option from the same team if both are 90% to start, but you can see the ill effects that unexpected DNP has had on me this game week. All things considered, I guess we actually still did alright to grab 2,550 rare essence from these two teams, which will go into crafting later this week. Stay tuned at home, lads and ladies, but we don't want to miss out on further opportunities of taking those scores even higher while the action is ripe in the EFL Championship. For comparison here, the first game week, 682 managers entered the leaderboard competitions. If we then mosey on over to the second game week of action, you can see 804 managers entered rare leaderboard action in the English second tier. And that's naturally something you're going to see as the season progresses. Cards become cheaper, managers win more rewards as the season kicks off, and it becomes a more attractive proposition for managers to buy into and enter teams in new divisions, further increasing the level of competition. That's not groundbreaking theory or anything, we all know this, but what it means, as mentioned, is that we want to be taking advantage of the leaderboards while the competition is weaker and the rewards are more easily attainable. So to see our first game week of some terrible Bristol City scores and a DNP followed up in our second game week with some terrible Bristol City scores and a DNP, well, it's safe to say it's not an ideal scenario. Especially in Team 2, where we can see once again a DNP with no sub coming in, this time in midfield, which hurts even more this game week when you pair it up with a 100 berry from Bonham in goal. Just feels like a waste of a great individual score, especially when our captain, the Lord and Saviour Zian Fleming, was coincidentally ruled out as the Burnley lineup was announced with an injury. Definitely nothing to do with a move away from the club or anything like that, but it means we can't even trust the great Zian Fleming at the moment in our side, unfortunately. Luckily, we did have a sub to come on for him as our captain to just about creep us into the 1,000 essence territory in that second team. So, you know, we do have some spoils here for our troubles, which is always nice with 2 lesser scores across both entries. But we of course want to be doing more, especially now the double boosted leaderboard rewards have expired. So this is where it's a good time to identify the issue. There's no point simply going through the motions and picking weak lineups each game week just because we've already bought certain players. You know, that's the beauty of the Sorare market. There is room to pivot and maneuver and sort our gallery out. Specifically right now, I'm talking about my midfield options. DMP from Magoma on the right obviously hurts, but even the Bristol City stat on the left, you can see Sam Greenwood, our midfielder there, was initially benched. Now, I knew he would get on the pitch eventually, but that's always going to make it harder for a player to impact the game and get a strong SO5 score if they're only coming off the bench. You know, if we look at my gallery for EFL Championship midfielders at the rare level, we can see some big problems with the current setup. Rodriguez was ruled out for 6 weeks with an injury after purchase, which, you know, is bad luck, but it is what it is. We have to deal with that. Magoma is a DMP threat based on the last game week, as you've seen, but that wouldn't have even helped me here if I knew he wasn't going to play, as Max Bird has been sold by Bristol City to Birmingham, so we'll have to ease him into the squad there and see what game time he gets. And while you think Horvat might be a natural replacement for Greenwood in midfield, or even Max Bird himself, that isn't the case so far, and he currently remains a bit part option for the club. So, you know, out of all of my midfielders, I'm struggling to lock down even one guaranteed starter from all of these options, let alone another midfielder for a second team alongside further bench coverage. And you can definitely sit there and say, ROYALIVI, you should have bought smarter on the markets, and you would probably be 100% right in saying so. But you can't change the past. The sands of time will only erode away at our hearts if we're gloomy over loftier tides, so we instead need to look at immediate action to sort this issue out for game week 3. We're at a pivotal point early on into the season where we either commit to these leaderboard teams for the whole campaign, or we consider selling up while prices are still high. And we are going to go with the former. Now, there's no doubt that crafting later in the week could provide some options, as a good chunk of my rare essence will be EFL Championship essence at this point, but we can't rely solely on a rollie of the dice to turn our fortunes around. I'd rather hit the market now after 2 games and lock in some midfielders ready to rock and soccer ball goal stuff things. So if we start by taking a look at the Bristol City stack, it makes sense to take a look at Bristol City midfielders and see who we need coverage for in the squad. But the thing is, you take one look at Bristol City's available midfielders and it doesn't scream out as really being beneficial to So5. I mean, their highest scoring midfielder over the last 10 games is Scott Twine, who is not only constantly linked away from the club, but after scoring in the most recent game week, he will no doubt carry results-orientated premium on the auctions market when champion cards come back into circulation. And then that's when I realised I don't actually have to go out and buy a Bristol City midfielder. Yes, it makes sense from a lot of perspectives, especially if City come out and batter a team on any given game week, but the last 2 results show that the outcome of that will be few and far between as the season goes on. So instead, I'm moving away from the idea that I have to keep Team 1 purely as Bristol City. You know, we're only 2 games into the championship with another 44 to go. We're not locked into anything. We can be fluid with our gallery. I can even decide to try and sell some of these cards on the market while auctions are scarce if I really wished, but I'm looking to avoid doing that at the time being. But it just means not focusing on keeping the team full Bristol City opens up another avenue for me, as my Bristol City players are fully in season and we're building around them. It means I can afford to go out and hit the market to get a classic crusher in midfield, and there's some obvious options here in the Middlesbrough duo of Aidan Morris and Sebastian Berhalter. Even Femi Aziz of Millwall has midfielder cards at classic level, but I opted to go for a bit of a cheaper, I won't say under the radar option, but a player who is capable of scoring AA, getting decisives, and making an impact for what should be one of the better squads in the league. I'm talking about new signing for West Ham, Arnie Engels. Recently signed in from Celtic for like 25 million, which is pretty carnage money at the championship level, but I guess you can't be surprised West Ham are throwing the big bucks around. They have the money and player sales to do so, but spending that large transfer fee on Engels, hopefully for me, locks in, you know, the preference of him starting in midfield every game week for them. We can see he actually started last game week and scored 25 AA. If he and West Ham can kick on, I have no doubt he is someone who can hit those upper 70s to 80s on a regular basis to make his market price of about £7 an easy and affordable option to be my new midfielder in Team 1. Now in our second team, it would be smart currently to continue using Zian Fleming as our classic card if we had the knowledge that he would remain there and would get picked, knowing the damage he can do in the division. But for reasons we've obviously mentioned, you know, transfer rumours linking him away, this just isn't viable right now. So looking at this from a budgetary perspective again, and where my gallery is currently at, it makes more sense to pivot with the second team entirely. And what I mean by that is dropping the Lord and Saviour out of my team as the classic card in the forward/extra spot, as I can now replace him with an in-season card in that extra position to allow me to get a classic card again in midfield on the market. Think that makes sense? And we can see Tolej and Hirakawa are my forwards in Team 1, Stansfield and McAtee are my forwards in Team 2, so I've got the coverage sorted in the forward spots. It's midfield where our problems are. So it'd be great if Magoma could become a regular starter at Norwich in that midfield slot to allow us to at least have the option of getting Fleming back in that classic slot if he remains at Burnley. But right now we can't afford that luxury or trust Magoma's percentages or game time, so this is a necessary strategy shift taking us back to the classic market. Again, similar options as before apply, but wanting to keep this classic card under £10 of the King's Finest, I'm feeling fruity because Leo Scienza has become the apple of my eye at about £8. And yes, this is someone who has had a slow start to the new campaign, but we could scroll across to his prior scores at this level, and he's someone who's more than adept at pushing the So5 ceilings a decent amount of times across a season, and that's what we're looking for. Those sun-run game weeks where a few players hit those big scores in conjunction with each other, and hopefully Scienza can be the next and final piece of Team 2's puzzle. So we can see the new setups here, and I quite like them. Engels coming straight in as my captain in Team 1, and Scienza slotting inside Team 2, as we mentioned. Realistically, those two midfielders can swap and change as I please if I feel like, they need to, depending on the fixture matchups and such. Now it's just a case of continuing on and trying to recoup our championship investment and win some cold hard cash money ahead of buying some teams in the other Sorare covered leagues come October. That's my plan. And as I've said, the double boosted leaderboards have now expired. They're no longer available for us to win double prizes, so we have to make the most of what we do win at the regular level. Not an absolutely terrible start to proceedings then, but our team selections could have been a bit better, and that's why we fixed it now. We're in a better place to go forward and compete for rewards with more reliable options. It's a long season, and building around players who regularly start is always going to shift and move, so I think being perceptive of that and adapting to those changes will play a big part in any manager's long-term success. We'll see who I craft on Friday, and I'll catch you then, because I love you.